Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today on the Wax channel. In a second I'll hand over to David Tipling, who's going to talk to us about what he's been up to and what his work is. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, thanks, Tiffany. Hello, and hello everyone else.
Excellent. So I'll hand over to you to do your presentation. So I hope everybody enjoys and we'll catch you at the end.
Okay, thanks, Tiffany. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this WEX webinar. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. I know there's quite a few of you today, so I thought I would just, before I get into the pictures that I've taken over the last 12 months and talk a little about them, just really introduce myself in case there's quite a few of you out there who are perhaps not familiar with my work and what I do. So I thought I'd just spend the next 5 minutes just talking a little about that. So I started taking pictures in 1978, a long time ago now, and I've always had a passion for birds. So I got into birds and birding when I was about 9, and photography came 2 or 3 years later. So started photographing birds in 78 and gradually progressed through my teens until by the time I was in my late teens, I knew I wanted to be a photographer, but couldn't really see a way of doing it. So I ended up with various what I'd call proper jobs, doing various things for about 10 years, and then took the jump to become a professional photographer, shooting wildlife in 1992. So when I turned professional, I'd already joined the Tony Stone agency and one or two other. I'd started to work with 1 or 2 other agents as well, selling my work. And in those days, stock photography was a pretty good thing to get into. I realized early on that birds weren't necessarily going to pay all the bills. So I needed to diversify quite a bit. And I did all sorts of things, shot all sorts of things to do with the environment, including other animals, wildlife, landscapes, people, and did a lot of sort of advertising style pictures. And this is one of them that was shot for a toothpaste ad many years ago. So in the late 90s, I did an expedition down to Antarctica and camped next to an emperor penguin rookery and I was still shooting film in those days, went down there with 250 rolls of film, came back with lots and lots of pictures of emperor penguins, and those pictures did really, really well and sold globally for lots of different advertising campaigns, and greeting cards and calendars and all sorts of other uses. This ended up being my best-selling picture. It's sold over 800 times now around the world for various things. It was used by Walmart a few years ago for a clothing ad, but I was aiming to shoot stuff that was really sort of anthropomorphic, so relayed sort of human emotion, and they're the sort of images that advertisers in particular would pick up on. So as you can see with this picture, it's just sort of illustrating love and care and devotion and all those sort of emotions and the sort of things that advertisers want to convey sometimes. In more recent years, I've worked on lots of different book commissions, and in 2006 started work with the author Mark Cocker on a book called Birds and People, which looked at the cultural importance of birds to people around the world, and traveled to I think 38, 39 different countries, shooting that over a 6 to 8 year period. This was one of the pictures I shot for the book. This ended up on the front cover, and these are Kazakh eagle hunters from Western Mongolia. There's a little story attached to this. I was staying with the guy that's second on the left here, Dal Han, and he didn't speak any English, so I had an interpreter with me. And the night before I took this shot, it was the day before the start of the Eagle Hunters Festival in Western Mongolia, and these eagle hunters get together from across the region. There was around 80 of them that year. This was 2006, and this was taken on the morning of the start of the festival, but the night before I spent it with him drinking Russian vodka. I had a really bad hangover the next morning. I was really annoyed with myself, but I was out on the steppe waiting for the hunters to arrive on horseback, and Dahl spotted me. He was on his own. He spotted me and he stopped and he waited for his 3 friends to catch him up, and he got them to line up in a row, and they all rode towards me, and I got this shot. I like to think that rather than this being taken in a 500th of a second, this was really taken over an evening's vodka drinking with Dahl, because this wasn't planned or anything. But when he saw me, he helped create the photograph. These days, I'm not just photographing birds, although birds are my main sort of subject, but really any wildlife. I'm based in Holt in North Norfolk, on the North Norfolk coast. So I'm in a great location for getting out throughout the year and photographing all sorts of different things. So do a lot of general wildlife photography here. This is a grey seal, photographed last November. I was given the loan of the new Olympus 150 to 400 millimeter lens, and I took this during the week I had that. So this is pretty much this is a view of pretty much my sort of stomping ground close to where I live. This is a view of the salt marsh at Wells. So the town of Wells is there in the left, and you can see the Wells Channel, and then on the coast there you've got Wells Beach, Holcombe Pines, if you know this part of the world, and then looking further up the coast, there's Holme and Titchwell and all those places in the distance. So I'm really never happier than when I'm out with my camera and really roaming across these marshes, seeing what I can find. Well, I always get asked what gear I use, and if you've got any questions, do raise them. I think Tiffany's going to flash them up on the screen, and I'll answer them as I go along. But this is my basic kit. So I'm an Olympus user. I have been now for, this will be my 4th year actually this year, this March. I've recently replaced my 300 f4 Pro lens with this new 150 to 400 millimeter lens, which I really love. I use that on the EM1X. You can see it's fixed to there. I also use an OMD EM1 Mark III. And then the other lenses here, the 40 to 150 f2.8 Pro, the 12 to 40 2.8, and the 8mm fisheye. And then I use 2 converters, the 2x converter and the 1.4 converter, and the 2 flash guns. And this is really the kit I would put in my bag when I'm going away on a trip anywhere away from home. Generally, when I'm photographing here, I might just put the 12 to 40 in a pocket, the 2 converters, and just go out with the 150 to 400 on the EM1X when I'm working here. I really love this new lens. Actually, it's just so versatile, and it works so well with the converters as well. So it gives you a really good range to work with. Really perfect for shooting wildlife. So I was going to talk this afternoon about what I've done over the last year through various lockdowns and restrictions, but I'm going to show you some of my photographic highlights, really. Talk a little about how I've taken them, and hopefully pass on 1 or 2 tips along the way, particularly if you're an Olympus user. So I guess you, like me, are looking forward to perhaps spreading your wings a bit in the next few weeks. I've been very lucky, really, in living where I do in North Norfolk, because there's always a lot going on throughout the year here with wildlife, and I can walk out of my door here and do a circuit that takes me across a heath, through farmland, through woodland, down to the coast, down to Salthouse and Cley. So I've got reed beds and marshes down there, lots and lots of different habitats and lots of good wildlife. So in many respects, it hasn't affected me, or the lockdowns haven't affected me quite as much as perhaps it could have done if I hadn't been living in such a wildlife rich environment. But I was going to start in March, and February, March is probably the best time. Well, it is the best time to photograph day hunting barn owls in North Norfolk. I take people out to photograph them, particularly during February. This was a picture that was taken last year looking into the light. So with something like this, I'm making sure I'm exposing for the brightest parts of the image, so that I don't overexpose the whites of the birds. So that's quite important when you're doing this sort of thing. But I love photographing barn owls looking into the light. They got this lovely translucency in their wings, really shows up well. And we've been graced for the last 3 years now at Cley with this leucistic barn owl. The locals call him Casper. He's a male, and he lives in a, or his sort of winter roost site is in a broken down shed, and he can be very, very elusive. But a couple of weeks ago, for a week, he was out every morning hunting, and it was a really good photographic opportunity. So this is taken with the 150 to 400 mil lens, and here I wanted to show the environment the owl was in. So it's back at the 150 mil range, and this is Wiverton Church behind. So this is taken at Cley. So I've got Cley Church. If you know Cley, I've got Cley Church to my back, and I'm looking across the valley towards Wiverton. When I'm taking these sorts of shots, particularly barn owls against backgrounds like this, where your autofocus sensor could easily go on to the background where it might be difficult to track the bird, and particularly if it's small in the frame, I always use a cluster of autofocus points. So I quite like using the 9-point cluster. It's very, very effective at tracking flying birds, particularly against backgrounds. And here he is hunting. So I'd have had the 9-point cluster on here as he's diving down to get a vole. And this is him with a vole on his shed, about to disappear off and eat it away from the glare of us photographers. Well, we're getting to the end of the frog toad season now. Still got a few in my pond here. But last year I was doing quite a bit of underwater stuff, and two years ago I was loaned the Olympus housing for the OMD M1 Mark II, and I took lots of pictures of frogs and toads then with that, and it worked really, really well. But I've got an old Aquatica housing here that I used to use when I used Nikons years ago, which I've still got, and although it's not custom built for the Olympus camera, I can fit it inside I can fit the Olympus inside the housing. So that's what I've been doing, because I don't use a housing more than a couple of weeks of the year. I didn't feel I wanted to invest in another one, so I've made do, and basically I put the camera on the intervalometer, so it's taking a picture every second, so you can get 999 pictures like that, and then just submerge it in the water and gently push it towards frogs or toads, whatever my target might be. I tend to lay on the bank of the pond to do that. I really love black and white work. I started in the late 70s, early 80s shooting in black and white. A lot of professional photography was done in black and white in those days. And as soon as I sort of progressed and started shooting in color, I sort of left black and white behind. But in the last few years, it's so easy to convert on the computer. I use the Silver FX in the Nick software to make my black and white conversions. But often, if I think I've got something that could look really effective in black and white, I'll make the conversion. Particularly, there's a lot of contrast, a lot of texture and tone there that perhaps can be brought out, and perhaps be made to be a more effective picture in black and white than color, which I think is sometimes the case. Well, those of you who know me will know that I spend quite a lot of time photographing hares. There's a lot of hares here in North Norfolk. It's perfect conditions for them, really. It's heavily gamekeepered, so unfortunately we don't have hardly any foxes around here, and the stoats get hammered somewhat, so there's not too many predators. So the young leverets don't get too heavily predated, and because of all the shooting, there's a lot of game cover left around the fields, so it's perfect for leverets to hide in. We have big fields here when you get away from the coast, which hares love, so it's just perfect for hares, and they do very, very well. I've been out this morning and seen quite a few, so they're not too difficult to find. A bit more difficult to photograph, but this was in a field where there were a lot chasing around, and I tend to either shoot from the car, or if I can, if I've got a field where the hares are a lot more approachable, then I'll get out of the car and I'll lay down on the ground, and I usually have a camo suit on, or something over me to cover myself up, because they'll tend not to come too close if you've not got some form of camouflage on. So this was taken with the 100 to 400 zoom lens that I was given last spring to use to shoot pictures ready for the launch of the lens last summer. And so I was using it every day for quite a few weeks, taking all sorts of things, but took quite a few hare shots. And once lockdown had eased last year, I took the first opportunity to get up to Bempton Cliffs to photograph seabirds, and it was a really windy day when I got up there, quite dull, but very windy. And I quite like dull, windy days there. I think it's perfect for photographing birds that have a lot of sort of bright white plumage. Means you're not, you don't have so much danger in burning out the plumage. You can balance the blacks and the whites and the browns more. And use the 100 to 400 for this shot, and again with that autofocus cluster. And I have I play around with the autofocus sensitivity as well in the menu, depending what I'm doing, but I normally have it on about -1, sometimes -2, often when I'm doing things like this. So it's quite sort of sticky, so it doesn't go in and out too much, and sticks on things very well. And I think that can be quite effective for shooting birds in flight. And the 100 to 400 works really well with converters. So I put the 2x converter on to take this head portrait of a razorbill that was sitting on the cliff. So what's that? That's in 35mm terms. That's 1600mm f13. So a lot of magnification, but works really well. And it's, it's pretty sharp at that end. So again, that's quite a versatile combination. So I guess, like a lot of us, I've also been doing a lot in the garden, and perhaps setting up more things than I would have done normally. We have a very small garden. We're on the edge of the town here, but I try and attract as many different species of bird as I can into the garden. I've got feeders up all year, and in the spring and summer, particularly when birds are feeding their young, there's no better time than to put out mealworms, and then various species will readily come to collect mealworms to take to their young to feed for themselves. And I quite like using garden implements and different things as perches. Gives a sense, if you do something like this shot, to a sense of a sort of an urban environment, a sense that the bird's in that sort of setting or a garden. I think that's quite nice sometimes to give the picture more of a sense of place. Well, my journey's out on the marshes at this time of year, and last year I was out a lot in May and June, and because of lockdown, a lot of the birds, because of the footpaths and things in North Norfolk have been so quiet, there was a lot of birds, species that perhaps sometimes wouldn't nest quite so close to paths, nesting quite close, which gave some quite nice opportunities. And a little colony of avocets at Burnham Norton had taken up residence quite close to the path in a field full of cattle. And for much of the day, they had to lure cows away from their nests. So this is a distraction display. This bird's trying to lure the cow away from its eggs by sticking its wings out and calling excitedly. Whenever you're doing something like this, it's obviously quite important to try and make sure you're focused on the bird. If the cow had been in soft focus, that wouldn't have mattered too much, but it's important with this image particularly to have the bird in focus. And I quite like the bird in the background there on its nest as well. That helps to sort of tell the story a little. And because I was doing a lot in the garden for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been feeding hedgehogs with special hedgehog food. I love hedgehogs food. It's a great mix. And in some summers, and particularly when there's been a dry summer, I have got a lot of water out. They've been coming to drink and feed, and I've had over 10 coming some evenings. And so I was setting different things up and photographing the hedgehogs, again trying to create a garden environment with different props and stuff. And other times I've created like little woodland sets and got them walking through leaves and along logs and things to give a sense that they're actually out in the countryside as well. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do if you've got stuff coming to the garden. There's lots of things you can do, and you can create different scenarios. Well, while I had the 100 to 400 lens, as I said, I'd photographing a lot of hares, and once we got into June, there's some fields close to here that are really spectacular, full of oxeye daisies, and used a lot by hares. So here again, I've tried to give a sense of where the hares are living. Are living. I've got the farm and the hedgerow and trees behind. So I'm using a big depth of field here, something like F11, F16. Just to give that sense of place. You can see there's two hares hidden amongst the flowers in the frame here, and this is a really nice situation because there's lots of opportunity that the hares have runs through the field, so you can see where the hares are traveling. So just by sitting down close to one of these hare runs and waiting. There were so many hares in this field. It didn't often take too long for one or two to come along. The only downside was there's a path along the edge of here, and occasionally if I got there and someone had a dog off a lead, that was a bit of a disaster because quite often that would then mess it up for 2 or 3 hours. But when it was quiet, it was really quite effective. Here's a hare that looks like it's sniffing the flower. I'm not sure that it was necessarily sniffing the flower. I think it was going to give it the petals a nibble, but I was quite pleased to get this shot. And here's one looking through the daisies. So quite often with something like this, it's quite difficult to autofocus. So I'll tend to try and manually focus. My eyes aren't quite what they used to be, so I do struggle a little sometimes, but I try my best in a situation like this where I'm looking through vegetation to manually focus. Well, the next sequence of pictures were all taken with Pro Capture, and one of the things that really attracted me to the Olympus system, and something I use a lot, is Pro Capture. I think it's really powerful tool in the camera, and it just enables you to shoot shots that are just much more difficult to shoot without. So I always shoot in Pro Capture High, and I set my Pro Capture in the menu so that I'm saving around 30 frames in the buffer, and then 4 or 5 afterwards. So basically when I press the button, the previous 30 frames are saved and 4 or 5 post frames. And I do that because when I'm using Pro Capture, I'm trying to get a bit of action, a bit of movement that's happened that I perhaps wouldn't be able to get because my reactions wouldn't be fast enough. So the best pictures tend to be those just as I'm pressing or just before I press the button. So they're the frames that for me are the most important. I've done a lot of work with butterflies taking off in the last couple of years, and last June I spent quite a long time in the Norfolk Broads. So if anyone's interested, I'm running tours down into the Norfolk Broads this summer to photograph swallowtails. But this was a swallowtail that had just taken off, and I got a sequence of 3 shots of different wing positions as it was launching off. Something like this, you've got to use a very fast shutter speed. I mean, this isn't pin sharp, but I was using 3,200th of a second. I try and use 4 or 5,000th of a second if I can with flying butterflies. This is a silver wash fritillary taking off, so similar to the swallowtail as well. And again, 3,200th of a second. Tiffany, excuse me, I've not seen any questions coming up, so I don't know if it's because I just can't with my screen, or the people are asking and I just can't see them, or I'm not answering them. So if there are questions coming up, apologies. I'm not ignoring them, I just haven't seen them. But anyway, I'll carry on.
Hi, David.
Hi.
I can run through a couple of the questions
Okay,
now
yeah.
for you. So Arma asked if the photo of the horse that you showed, did you use flash for that at all?
I did. Yeah, I did use flash. It's taken on film about 25 years ago, and I can't remember what I did, but yes, it was flash. Yeah.
And how do you decide when to use flash? That was a question from Francesca.
Okay, I don't use flash very often, actually. Only very occasionally, and normally fill flash just to put a little bit of light in there. Okay, I do shoot owls at night using flash, but we're using lamps and things as well. But I just generally use it as fill in. And in fact, when I need a bit of fill in light, quite often I'll use a reflector rather than flash if I can. I just feel it's maybe a bit more natural and have a bit more sort of control.
No, of course, that's really interesting. Nigel asked about your 100 to 400. He said, what are the sort of advantages and disadvantages of using it out in the field?
Oh, I think it's a great versatile lens, 100 to 400. It's very sharp throughout the range. And you've got that versatility. So to have that length, I think it's really good. I mean, that's why I'm liking the 150 to 400, which I guess you could call its big brother. It just gives you the versatility. You can be like with the hairs I've just shown. You can get a range of shots just by sitting in one position without having to change lenses or put converters on or off. The downside is that at 400 mil, it's at 6.3, so it's a bit more difficult to control your out of focus backgrounds. You're not necessarily always going to get lovely bokeh when you perhaps might want it, but I think the benefits of that, the benefits of the smaller sensor in the Olympus is that quite often you actually want that little bit of extra depth of field, and you can keep your speed and have that depth. And I've found it more advantageous than I've found it a disadvantage, I have to say, over the 3 or 4 years that I've been using the system.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. I agree with you. It's a fantastic lens in terms of range.
Yeah.
Somebody did ask, before you were able to get that lens, do you have any recommendations, for people starting out, maybe the lens you used before that?
So, well, yeah, I'm not using the 100 to 400 now because I've got the expensive big brother I bought off Wex actually. But it depends. Yeah, it's what you can afford really. I always say to people, spend as much as you can afford on the lens. Really, I think it's quite important. A lot of people like the 40 to 150 is a really good lens, and that's maybe a really good kind of, I suppose it's not really a starter lens, but it's very, very sharp. It's fantastic with both converters, so you've got quite a lot of versatility there, and with 2 times converter you've got quite a lot of reach as well, so it's a 2.8. So I would say go for the 40 to 150 and then build from there. If you've got the 2 converters and the 40 to 150, and then just go on from there, really.
That's great. Absolutely. And then the last question for now, before we let you crack on, is apart from camouflage clothing, do you have any other tips to get close to wildlife without scaring them away?
Well, I do use sometimes a wide angle on the camera and put it out remotely in the garden and stuff. And I use the Olympus Share app on my phone to trigger the camera. And that's a really good way. You can just camouflage your camera. And with the app, you can change your aperture and shutter speed, ISO, and all the rest of it. And it's a really good way of photographing shy wildlife with a short lens. If you've got something that's set up, something that's coming somewhere regularly, particularly birds in the garden maybe, and it's a nice way of getting a shot that shows the subject within the environment as well. But otherwise, no, I mean, that's the challenge for all wildlife photographers really often, to get close enough to the damn things. So yeah, it's one of those things. You use a bit of stealth and
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll let you crack on with the rest of your images, and then we'll come back to some more questions at the end.
Yeah, okay, all right, brilliant. So just staying on the Pro Capture theme, I went up to Scotland in late summer to photographing leaping salmon, and it was relatively successful. I didn't get quite the pictures that I wanted, but I got a reasonable selection at the end of the day. This was taken at a 2,000th of a second, so got to be really, really quick. But Pro Capture was perfect for this because I knew roughly where the salmon were leaping, but they were so fast that without Pro Capture, I would have missed many, many opportunities. And the beauty of Pro Capture was the fact that as soon as the salmon leapt, I had a sequence of the fish coming out of the water and then going back in. So I had the whole sequence. So I was able to choose the frames that really worked best. I'm looking forward to getting back up there again this summer to do more leaping salmon, I hope. And I'm sure some of you have been to Neil McIntyre's excellent red squirrel hide in the Highlands, and I went there in early September. And there was still a nice spread of heather out, so some nice pink backgrounds, and went there to do some leaping squirrels. So this was taken with the 40 to 150 2.8 at 2.8, and again here I've used a 2,000th of a shutter, 2,000th of a second shutter speed. I think so much of photography is obviously about, it goes without saying, it's about the light, but the direction of light and how you can influence the mood and feel of a picture, depending on where the light is coming from. So I quite like to shoot my subjects when there's some moody lighting possibilities. So this is a couple of knot at Salthouse, and the light was coming in from the side, so from the left-hand side, and there was quite a lot of heavy shade here as well. So the bird in the background is just in the shade, a little bit of light hitting it. This was right at the end of the day. Beautiful light earlier this year. So and here I should just say, when you've got a couple of birds in the frame like this, I think for this particular image to work, it was important to get the bird behind in sharp focus, as well as obviously the bird in front. So I played around with the aperture to make sure that I had both birds in sharp focus. So I shot this at f11 just to make sure. So quite a big depth of field. And in the autumn, I always head to Snettisham on the Wash for the knot roost. I think it's one of the world's great wildlife spectacles, let alone one of the great wildlife spectacles of Britain. Every time you go, there are different opportunities, which is what I really like about it. I've been going for 30 years now, so I've gone on the last few years, certainly in the last 20 years, I've gone on every spring tide that I've been able to in autumn, and it always throws up new potential, new possibilities. This is the moment when the big flocks erupting off from the roost, and I thought this converted quite nicely into black and white with some nice reflections in the water. And this is as the birds are coming in to their roost on the gravel pit. Whilst most people go in the mornings for the spring tides that occur in the mornings, it's well worth, if you've not thought about going in the afternoons and the evenings, certainly in late summer, early autumn, the evening tides can be really good, particularly if you've got a nice clear evening like this and you've got the sun going down over the Wash. You can get some nice pictures. So these are oyster catchers. There's one or two red shank in amongst those and a couple of knot. And they're flying along the coast, coming into roost. Well, I went up in the autumn to spend some time in the oak woods in the northwest Highlands of Scotland, and this is Arundel Woods National Nature Reserve near Loch Sunart in the northwest Highlands, and it's a fantastic place. I had very mixed weather. You can see here I had some fantastic rainbows, lots of showers coming in, but has had a wonderful few days in the woods. And they're called the Celtic Rainforest because they do receive a lot of rainfall, but and because of this, there's lots and lots of moss. The moss just carpets the woodland floor and the trunks of the trees, and it's all very photogenic. There's lots of nice opportunities to be had. There's another one. This is a high key shot of a sessile oak within the forest. I really like the textures on the trunks and limbs of this tree and the leaves and stuff. And I think this is more effective as a black and white as opposed to a color. I took this with the 8mm fisheye lens. I also use a Mavic Pro drone, which I have, and I was driving back from the oak woods one afternoon alongside a loch and spotted this little island, which was beautiful. The autumn colours were really quite striking. I took a few conventional shots and then thought it'd be quite nice to try and get a drone shot looking directly down on this little island. I'm only at about 150 feet here. It's a very small island, but I think it was quite an effective sort of viewpoint. Well, I have a small woodland, four acres of woodland here in North Norfolk, which I kind of use as an outdoor studio. And a few years ago now, I created this woodland pool, and it's very popular with sparrowhawks coming in to drink and bathe throughout the year, but they tend to come most in well, from around now through to autumn to drink and bathe, but I have them visiting the food during the winter. So this is an immature or a young male that's coming in to drink and bathe. And I have buzzards come as well. This was a bit of a lucky shot, so this wasn't really planned, but I was quite pleased with the way it turned out. Bird was sitting on the log, and these were two young buzzards, and they were calling at each other, and then one flew in at the one that was perched, and I just kept my finger on the trigger, focused on the one that was perched, and got this shot, this sense of another one coming in. Well, while I was digging potatoes at a friend's small holding in the autumn, he well, when I arrived, he said, "Oh, come and have a look at the swallows. We've got some swallows in their barn." So I went to look at these swallows, and they were all lined up in the nest. Anyway, when I'd filled a couple of sacks of potatoes, I was about to leave, and I went to look at the swallows, and they'd fledged, and they were sitting on the barn door. And for a couple of hours, they sort of hung around. I didn't have my camera with me, so I raced home, raced back, and I had about an hour's photography before they eventually went up onto the roof of the barn. But they sat on the barn door, and it gave some lovely opportunities for about an hour. And I think this was my favorite picture. Two on the barn calling as the parent is coming in with food. I quite like where the parent is positioned. It just gives a sense of the bird coming in and the adult coming in to feed. I had to use a very high ISOs. The light was going, and this was taken at about I think this was taken at 3,200 ISO, and I really don't like shooting at those sort of ISOs. So it was very grainy. So I've used the Topaz noise filter thing on this frame to get rid of the noise. I think it's been quite effective at doing that. Well, I always, when I used to live in Kent, I always used to go to Richmond and Bushy Parks in the autumn for the red deer rut. And again, somewhere I've been going for years and years and years. Used to be a time when you could go and not see another photographer. Times have changed somewhat, but I really enjoy going and just walking around, seeing what I can find. And every year I seem to get something a bit different. And I'd got some pictures, but I'd never got very good pictures of the deer with the big clumps of bracken that they often have on their antlers. Until this year, when I came across a red deer that was in amongst some really deep bracken, and it was uprooting a lot of bracken, it was settling on its antlers, and every time it looked at me through the bracken, it almost looked like it was camouflage. So it was quite a nice opportunity. I spent an hour or so with this stag as it moved through the bracken. This is a shot of my wood in autumn, early misty morning. And in autumn and winter, it's the time when I spend most time there photographing the woodland birds. And as I say, I use it as a sort of outdoor studio. So this is taken with Pro Capture again, 3,200th of a second. So same, the Pro Capture settings as I mentioned earlier. So here I've got a feeder that's just out a shot on the right, and the bird's coming into the feeder. So I'm just standing, hand holding, and waiting for the birds to fly across in front and firing away. You have to take a lot of pictures, but you know, if you shoot enough, you're going to end up hopefully with some good ones eventually. I was quite pleased with this particular shot. This is a great tit with its tail and wings fanned. So I'm always ready in case we have snow coming, both in my wood, in my garden here, with different things set up, different props set up. And so this is one of my hides. It's got one-way glass. I actually hire these hides out. So if you're interested in photographing sparrowhawk, then do get in touch. I'll show you a website at the end of this to look at. But so I'm set up here for the snow. I've got an old garden table there that I use as like a sort of raised bird table, and various props and things for the birds to come and land on. And in February this year here in North Norfolk, we had a week of snow, and I suppose unusually, quite often when it snows here, it might snow overnight and then we don't get any more. But for a few days, it was snowing a lot during the day, which was really nice. I think it really adds atmosphere to snowy pictures. So I did as much as I could, because you never know when the next bit of snow is going to come, really. And certainly it was the first good bit of snow since the beast from the east here. And quite often, I never quite know what's going to turn up in snow either. Some things you're not really expecting. Although I have bullfinches around the wood, I wasn't expecting bullfinches to come down, but they came down and feeding on seeds on the bramble. And this is a female that appeared when it was snowing one morning. Another Pro Capture shot. So I'm focused on the fork handle, and I wanted to get a picture coming in, a picture of a robin or a blackbird coming in and landing. So I'm just focused on the handle, waiting for the bird to appear and then firing away. And then, you know, you end up with quite a few pictures, and you can choose your favorite frame. Have a look on YouTube. I did a video for Olympus called Flower Pot Wars on blackbirds fighting at my feeding station. And if you watch that video, you can see how I set it up. But again, it's Pro Capture again, focused on the flower pot and then just waiting for the action to happen. And again, you know, really fast shutter speed. So this is 3,200th of a second again to freeze the wings. Well, I'll finish off with a few hares in the snow. I toured around the lanes here, and on my walking circuit came across quite a few hares, which some of which were quite approachable. And here's one in a maize field. This was one during another snow squall. Really helps in these situations where you've got a dark background, where the snow shows up really well. Don't work so well when you haven't got a dark background, of course. So I I framed this so there was plenty of space in the top of the frame to show the falling snow. And this is a field very close to where I live here. It's got this lovely old wizened hedge. And I've been trying actually off and on whenever I've passed, hoping there was going to be hares in this field and to get the backdrop of the wizened hedge. And it all came together when we had snow on the ground, which was even better. Although this was shooting into the light, I quite like this. I quite like the layered effect across the snow and that hedge behind. And then I had them boxing as well, which was a bit of a bonus. So this was taken with a 300 f4 Pro lens and a 2x converter, so 1200 millimeters. So quite a lot of reach there. Boxing's quite a tricky thing to photograph. I often see it, but it's often the other side of a huge field, so it can be quite frustrating with hares when you're seeing a lot of action and you're just too far away. But just occasionally it all comes right, and you get them with the range doing their thing. I just thought I'd finish with a picture of what I'm working on at the moment, really, which are marsh harriers. They're getting ready to breed, and there are one or two locations here where you can sit in the car and have a pretty good view of birds coming in. This is taken with the 150 to 400, the new lens, with the 2x converter on. So in 35mm terms, we're talking about 2000 millimeters. So that's one of the other benefits of that lens. You get such an amazing reach, and you can start to photograph things like this, which sometimes are out of reach. So just a quick plug, have a look at Norfolk Photo Safaris. That's where all my tours and details of hide hire can be found. I've got a blog on davidtipling.com, and tomorrow, if you're not fed up with hearing my voice and you'd like to see a bit more, I'm doing a webinar for Olympus Spring Has Sprung. If you go on the Olympus image space website, the events page, have a look there. You can book for that. There's a few tickets left. Thank you all very much for listening. And Tiffany, if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
We have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So somebody's asked if you have a favourite wide angle lens at all.
Well, I use the 12 to 40 most of the time, and the 8mm fisheye. So those two really.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And Gary's asked if you shoot in manual or does it depend?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, wasn't I? Yeah, no, I do shoot completely in manual. So everything, even ISO. I don't have any sort of auto ISO limit or anything. I control everything manually.
Perfect. So I think that's all of the questions, actually. So thank you ever so much for talking with us today and for presenting some of your images. They're absolutely wonderful. And it was great having you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to everyone who joined, and we will catch you on our next event.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.